Okay, this lesson we are continuing on with writing linear equations in slope-intercept form. We'll probably fly through this lesson because this is all stuff you should know very easily now. But, example 1, put this in your journals. We are to use the slope and y-intercept to write an equation. It tells us that the slope is -2 and the y-intercept is 5. So, do you guys remember the equation for slope-intercept? What is it?
Y equals mx plus b.
Very good. So where do I plug in the slope? Where m is. So I say -2x. And the y-intercept goes where? What letter?
Plus 5.
Where the b is. So we say plus 5. Cake, right? Let's look at example 2. All right, so for this example, you have a graph, and they want to know which of the 4 equations represent the line that you see. Instead of looking at each one of those 4 equations and trying to figure out which one it goes with, I just look at the graph and write the equation, and then I can find the answer real quickly. So the first thing we need to find is the slope. How do I find the slope on this? You guys remember? Slope is rise over run. So I can look at the graph and I can say rise over run. Well, in this case, my rise is negative. I went down how many?
2 over.
I went down 2, so I said -2, and then I went over how many? 5. So my slope is -2/5. So I can already say y equals -2/5 x. Now, how do I find the y-intercept? I just look at
where it's on the y.
where it crosses the y-line. Where does it cross the y-line?
3.
+3. So I say -2/5 x plus 3. And there's my equation. Good so far? So those are 2 different ways. Now we're going to look at writing equations when you're given 2 points. All right, so they have a graph, and they've given you 2 points on a graph. Now, I could graph this just looking at the graph like we did just this last example, but I would like you to get used to seeing the 2 points and graphing from those. So the 2 points they give us are 0 and -5. This is example 3, by the way. And the second point they give us is 3, -1. So when you have 2 points, you need to find the slope. Do you guys remember the equation to find a slope?
Rise over run.
Rise over run, but what's the equation? Yes, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And remember, it doesn't matter which equation you put as your 2's and your 1's. Just make sure you do the same for both. So I'm going to call this my y2 and x2. And this is my x1 and y1. So I would write -1 minus a -5 over 3 minus 0. When I have a negative next to a negative like this, what does it become? So that actually reads -1 plus 5 over, what's 3 minus 0?
3.
Good. What's -1 plus 5?
4.
So my slope is 4/3. Now, without looking at the graph, is there a way to find out what our y-intercept is? So we have y equals 4/3 x plus b so far, correct? Do you guys remember how to find b without looking at the graph? you take either one of these points and you plug it in where the y and the x are. Just to remind you. Now, in this case, you can just look at the graph because they've given us the graph. So what is the y-intercept for this one? Where does it cross the y line?
-5.
Yeah, so my equation is y equals 4/3 x minus 5. Good. On example 4, we're going to do the other method I just told you. So, all right, example 4. Write an equation for the linear function f with the values f of 0 equals 5 and f of 4 equals 17. Okay, when you have a number in the parentheses, f of whatever, what is that usually saying? F of x. So I could write this as 2 points, right? X is 0, whereas y is 5. Here, x is 4, and the y is 17. So when you see this craziness, I would rewrite them as points because that makes a little more sense in your brain. Once you have them as the 2 points, can we find the slope now? Yes, because we can do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to make this my x2 and y2. So we'd say 17 minus 5 over 4 minus 0. What's 17 minus 5? And then 4 minus 0. Can I simplify 12 over 4? Makes my slope 3. So now we have y equals 3x plus b. So now we need to do that other method I told you where we plug in one of the points for x and y so we can solve for b. Which point would you like to plug in? Yes, the 0, the 5. Very good. This is going to make the math easy. So we're going to say 5 equals 3 times 0 plus b. Well, what's 3 times 0?
0.
Gone. So what does b equal? So much easy. So then we rewrite our equation. Y equals 3x plus 5. Any questions? Not too bad, right? Sometimes when you've started with a function here, they're going to ask you to write it in function form as the end. So the other way to write this, I'm going to make myself some room here, is to say f of x, and then you just write the equation. So if it says write an equation for the linear function, this is how you write the answer. I won't usually take off if you wrote y equals, because I know, but remember, because the f of x is technically just a label. Okay, any questions on how we did any of that? Do you want to do the real world example? I don't think you need to. You guys know how to create equations. I think I'm just going to let you go for it. So yours is lesson 4.1, just 3 through 15 all, and 24 through 38. That's what I wrote up there, right? Yep. Do what? Oh. And that's your assignment.